warm welcome from the Observer Research Foundation that I represent here. And thank you, Gladden and team, for putting all of this together. So I'm really excited. Now, to kick it off, let's go back to a fantastic panel we have lined up this morning. We have the person behind this effort, Balázs Orbán, Political Director of the Prime Minister of Hungary, who's going to be engaging with us. And I think Balázs's trips to the Redefining Dialogue and to India and to other parts of the world where he has engaged with discussions and debates quite frequently has motivated him to, in some sense, instigate all of us to put something like this together in Hungary, and he's found a very capable ally in Gladden. So in that sense, this is a team that was bound to create something fascinating in the days ahead. So Balázs will be speaking to us this morning. Joining him will be Max Abraham, Associate Professor of Political Science, Northeastern University from the US, and then Valina Chakarova, Geopolitical Strategist from Austria. And what are they going to be discussing? Simple, 2024. They're going to be discussing 2024 and what can we expect in 2025. The perceptions from their vantage points, the policies that we need to engage with, the strategies that might help us navigate changing times, uncertain times, turbulent times, choose your own adjective, but interesting times is perhaps a good way to describe what lies ahead. And I am literally going to ask them each the same question for the first round, which is key political events of 2024. We've had a number of elections, we've had conflicts, we've had takeovers of countries and capitals without resistance. In their perspective, are we witnessing new dynamics? And are we therefore looking at new times in the days ahead? Or are these all historic changes that are repeating themselves in 2024? So that's the first question. And maybe Balázs, how do you view 2024? And how excited are you for 2025?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome everyone here in Hungary, Budapest, in this wonderful venue, the Hungarian National Museum. It's a very historical place. 1848, in front of the building, that was the place where the Hungarian revolution and freedom fight started. And we sometimes have a feeling that we Hungarians still starting or leading a freedom fight for national conservative values, for the importance of national sovereignty, family, and traditional ways of European life, which is never easy. You have to be bold, you have to be strong, you have to be dedicated, you have to be confident, but you also have to be smart and adaptive, which requires a lot of discussions and a lot of thoughts. And this is why I'm very grateful to you that you came to Hungary. I hope you will be also grateful that you were invited, because Budapest is a very nice place, but we are also grateful because we want to learn from you, and we want to understand what the new reality is about. I think 2024 is about an end of an old era. And this would be my, my answer to your question, Samir. This is the end of an old era. I would describe this old era as an era of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism as a model of globalization, as a way of living, as a way of governance. I think it became obvious by the end of the year that it's not sustainable, not even sustainable in the United States, also not sustainable in the European Union. So the western part of the world is reshuffling things, and the outside world, the global south, or the rest of the world, or we can call it in many names, is also trying to invent new forms of government, new forms of how to manage the society, how to create a successful economy. And I think in 2025, this will be the first year of a new era. I would be very happy to hear as much as I can about how would you describe this new era. My description is quite simple. I rather like to call it as an age of sovereignty, where sovereign power centers with different form of governments, different form of society, different form of economic structures, they are competing each other, but also trying to find a way to stabilize the world order and try to keep up the cooperation. I hope that the biggest achievement of 2025 in line with this will be the closure of the Russian-Ukrainian war, which caused serious damage for us in the last years. I think it's caused serious damage for the entire world as well. Now, since we are talking, people are dying and suffering for no reason. So I think it would be better to bring an end of this conflict. We here in Hungary are very optimistic about this. Now the political momentum is there. New power balance inside the European Union, new American administration, commitment from the rest of the world, India, China, and some other important players as well. So we can, I hope we can convince those who are in the war to try to find a way for the peace. I'm very thankful. Thank you very much for Gladden. Thank you very much for the Institute, and thank you very much for our great friend Samir that they brought this thing.
Balazs, I want to actually ask you one more question on this new order that is going to confront us. Actually, if you look at a lot of the news reports and analysis from experts, many from Max Ibrahim's country, they are arguing that this is an upending of the global system. And the Western alliance is going to be endangered. It is going to be weakened with the election of Trump. So what is your prognosis on some of the gloomy commentary that you witness? Some stark commentary as well.
Well, I have a kind of a different reading of the American election result. I think it was the driving force behind the decision of the American voters was mainly domestic. So which means that they realized that if those policies are continued, the migration policy, woke policy, law and order policy, economic policies, the American stagnation or American, some even use this word decay, but probably it's too much, especially too much compared to European reality. So the American stagnation will not end. And for this reason, they voted for a different alternative, different policies in migration. They want to, take back control over the country. They want to restore law and order. They want to get rid of the woke policies. They want to have a new economic structure and support system. So I think United States of America wants to renew itself from inside, and it will have a consequence for the rest of the world as well. But if United States of America is confident and strong, and there are other countries who are also successful and strong and confident and have stable societies and successful economic models, that's the only starting point on which we can build a peaceful coexistence and cooperation, so according to my understanding.
A strong America is good for the world. Is a renewed America that has rejuvenated itself, is a public good, and that's something that
I think a stronger America and a strong China and a strong Europe would be good for the world, because it would have a stabilizing effect. Now the problem and the fragile situation always comes when a big power getting into a collapse. And if it's collapsing internally, then it has a very negative effect externally.
So Max, let me turn to you. 2024 and 2025, the same question to you, but maybe with an additional layer. everything we have witnessed as instruments of exertion of power have backfired. Sanctions, terror tactics, digital domain influence operations, uh, uh, mass collective action through public mobilizations. You've seen everything seems to have backfired on those who believe these are useful instruments. In 2024, we have seen them actually hurt the owner, those who used and deployed them. So, what do you see in 2020? Someone who studied insurgency and terror like you have, do give me the answer to the first question. Is Trump a danger to the world, or is Trump better for America and therefore better for the world? But also, how do we respond to the failure of many of these state policies that countries have deployed without care in the past?
Yeah, these are great questions. As a terrorism guy, I'm going to focus on that aspect of it. You'll recall that during the heyday of Islamic State, which is around the time period that we met, there was a widespread belief among pundits that extremism pays. So I'm sure that you remember hearing pundits talk about, how, yes, Islamic State was evil, but they were really strategic. They were really clever in terms of how they used violence. Their use of social media was supposedly so sophisticated. This was a group that was maximally extreme, and both in terms of how it used violence and also in terms of how it depicted the violence. James Foley getting his head chopped off by Jihadi John. And I think that Hamas, during Operation Al-Aqsa Flood on October 7th, 2023, adopted a similar tactical approach where they tried to be as violent as possible. And they killed about 1,200 Israelis. And look at where Hamas is today in response to its terrorist violence, in response to trying to be maximally extreme. Israel responded by crushing Hamas to the point where on the one-year anniversary of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, Hamas could barely even commit an attack. As you know, Hezbollah essentially declared war on Israel the following day, on October 8th, 2023. And it took Israel a while. It needed to stabilize the situation in Gaza, but then it went north and it completely took out the leadership, destroyed its finances, captured huge amounts of weaponry. And so look at where Hezbollah is today. That's another terrorist-owned goal, where terrorism, in theory, is supposed to further the organization and improve the political lot of the perpetrators. In both cases, it was a colossal failure. And of course, these conflicts are interrelated. We saw the effects of the degradation of Hezbollah because very soon after, the so-called rebels in Syria, led by the HTS group, they planned their offensive to correspond with the weakening of Hezbollah and the ceasefire there. And of course, as we've seen over the past 3 weeks or so, the rebels have just walked through Syria and successfully toppled Damascus. The reason why the rebels, or whatever you want to call them, have been so successful, in addition to external events such as the distraction of Russia, the degradation of Hezbollah, is because HTS adopted the opposite approach as Hamas and Islamic State. It didn't try to maximize carnage by attacking civilians. On the contrary, the leadership, Jolani, has made a real effort to be portrayed as much more moderate. And so it's actually not the case, generally speaking. And this goes beyond the anecdotal examples. This is something I've studied quite seriously in a large N format. But it turns out that moderation is actually advantageous when it comes to non-state actors, not extremism. And we're seeing that now play out in Syria, which is a conflict that I'm watching very closely. I really liked your question. I can stop there, or?
No, Max, I just want to ask you a quick follow-up on, what does the election of Trump do to the conflict in the Middle East, but generally to the area that you study? And B, although Hezbollah and Hamas are degraded beyond recognition, the brand Israel in the global south is at the brink. It's also struggling in Europe. So how do states, when they have to respond to terror actions, what are the lessons for states when they respond to these heinous terror activities? After losing 1,200 people within a month, you would argue Israel had lost global support.
Yes.
And is that also something to think about? That how do nations sustain these actions even while maintaining acceptability across sections? So two thoughts: Trump and lessons for Israel.
In any policy approach, there are trade-offs. Americans developed a real pessimistic view of counterterrorism, especially after the Iraq War, which of course was an enormous mistake. And it promoted this perception among Americans that counterterrorism is always folly, that it doesn't work, and even worse than that, that it's counterproductive in terms of generating even more terrorists. And I think that what we've seen in the Israeli case is that actually counterterrorism can win. It really depends on how motivated the country is. How serious a threat does the government regard the terrorists? But with enough commitment, the organization can get ground down. And frankly, India also has a history of being very successful in terms of taking on terrorists in its own country. The problem, of course, is that there are different audiences. And so you can always evaluate counterterrorism based on numerous metrics. Although it's true that a counterterrorism response of repression, if you will, using overwhelming force, can indeed be successful, there are non-trivial audience costs where the international community will then come to vilify the government for being heavy-handed and even genocidal. This is particularly true if you're Israel for all sorts of unique reasons, but in general, whenever governments act in a way which negatively affects the local population, you can expect the international community to condemn that government as evil.
So you have 1 minute on what does Trump do?
Yeah, so governments need to sort of prioritize which they value more. Is it international public opinion or degrading the militant groups? I think that Trump's approach to foreign policy is going to be very different than the Biden administration's. I think that there's going to be a movement away from liberal internationalism. There's going to be a lot less foreign policy which is defended in the name of democracy promotion and maintaining American credibility. I think US foreign policy is going to be more what I would describe as transactional, where the US is going to look at each policy in each government and make independent calculations about what is the best policy. In general, when someone says that, oh, Trump's foreign policy is going to be transactional, that is a pejorative. There's often a negative connotation. but I actually don't think that there should be. I think that a transactional foreign policy, not just for the United States, but for all countries, is the smart thing to do. And so there is not going to be any sort of overarching US foreign policy, but it needs to be understood sort of dyadically between countries as well as with regions.
Thanks, Max. Melina, let me turn to you. 2024 and the stresses in the global system. Where are we in the US-EU partnership? And what are the key divergences that could challenge this relationship and the commonalities that will bring them together?
First and foremost, it's a great pleasure being here. I envisioned this kind of forum to take place at the heart of Europe, and Central Eastern Europe are definitely not sharing this destiny envisioned in the Draghi's plan. In fact, it's missing in the Draghi's plan in the 400 pages. And obviously is going to be probably one of the regions that is going to witness positive development in the European Union-US relations now under Trump 2.0. First and foremost, I do not see any kind of disintegration or divorce of whatever kind between the Americans and the Europeans. It's going to be a relationship in transformation for sure, and there is going to be a prioritization based on concrete topics. Trump, in my view, is not going to be transactional when it comes to the relationship with Europe, but it's going to be transactional when it comes to the institutions representing Europe. And that's a big difference. So that means that there will be winners and there will be losers in this relationship. And of course, we might witness more, let's say, bifurcation within Europe when it comes to the shaping the relationship with United States, because some of the countries will be positioned ahead in terms of the personal relationship, right? I don't need to say that being in Budapest, Hungary is obviously going to be one of the countries that is already benefiting even ahead of the Trump 2.0. But in general, the good news here is that Europe has to do more, and finally is going to be confronted with, you know, the necessity to walk the walk when it comes to its own responsibility in the direct neighborhood and in concrete tasks that have been delegated to the Americans. Now, we are, as some of you know, my general assessment of 2024 and the global system, we are witnessing a bifurcation of the global system based on the decoupling between United States and China. And Europe, in my view, is one of the big losers out of this bifurcation as a collective player. But we are also living in a paradox where the old rules, and Europe sticks to the old rules, are still applying, but they're producing entirely new results. And obviously, the Europeans have to change something in the modus operandi. It's not going to work in this vastly changing world. The way I see also the world right now, and I think that this is not reflected in the assessment of on the European side, again, you need to differentiate between institutional and nation-based approach. The institutional approach, in my view, is going to struggle, but the nation-based approach, when it comes to the relationship with the Americans, is going to be more successful. And here, what we are observing at macro level, but also at the level of, the European states, is a world reflecting a sort of Rubik's cube of geopolitics. You are solving one piece and opening new, problems. You are scrambling, so to say, the other pieces. and that's no longer possible in an interconnected world, okay? Without taking the responsibility. So big question mark to me is how the Europeans, because that's not going to be the American job anymore, how are the Europeans going to take care of the security side of the equation, given the fact that they have to take care also of the intersection between industry and climate change relations, so, climate change related topics. So this trilemma of decarbonization, industry and competitiveness and security is, in my view, the big issue where, you know, the answers must come from the Europeans and can no longer be delegated to the Americans.
And they have to do this with a 30-hour work week. It's quite a bit of a load there. A lot of questions. But let me come to the close of this initial conversation we had this morning with a direct question to Balázs. Balázs, you heard Belina. She mentioned decoupling, two different systems, US and China. We've already heard from Max and yourself this morning about the conflicts that still continue to challenge all of us. She mentioned climate change as well. Velina mentioned climate change and climate change imperatives and CBAM and the European obsession with getting the right formula to take it ahead. What is the role of Central and Eastern Europe? The growth economies, the new political actors who have rediscovered voice and agency? What is your role, Balázs, in the world that lies ahead, managing the US, managing Western Europe, dealing with the rising powers in Asia and Africa and Latin America, and creating a crossroad that benefits all?
Yes. First, I think we Europeans should manage ourselves, not somebody else, because this is the most problematic part of the story. Europe is in trouble in general because the last couple of years they made very bad decisions on various fields. I don't want to go into migration or climate policies or some other issues. We all know what I'm referring to, just the geopolitical element. If you see if we try to analyze the European position right now, today, what happened, we decoupled from Russia, which was the cheap energy provider for Europe. We started a trade war against China, which is the biggest market for European companies. And now we have an incoming American administration with which the Brazilian elites fight for like years over ideology. And now we are getting prepared to start a kind of a trade war against the United States, which is a stronger country than Europe in actually all fields. So it's actually not logical. It's irrational because in all relations, Europe is a junior partner and it acts as it would be the senior actor. It's nonsense. So, this is the reason, and this is the main driving force behind the decline of European competitiveness, which was so obviously in detail portrayed by the Letta report and the Draghi report. We had the privilege to be the rotating presidents of the European Council for 6 months. So we try to use this window of opportunity to convince our European partners that, okay, finally try to neglect or not focus on ideology or geopolitical differences, but focusing on competitiveness, which can save us all if we do it right. We accepted the so-called Budapest Declaration, which is directly telling the European institutions to focus on the competitiveness agenda. And about Central Europe, so I think all Central European countries, there are different approaches, but all Central European countries are ready to work together to save Europe. But I think me as a Hungarian, I can say that for us, and I think for many Central European countries, the first and foremost job is to save ourselves. So we want to work together with Europe because it's easier to save ourselves if we save Europe, but I'm not sure if it's possible to save save Europe because of the political fragmentation. But we Hungarians did our part of the job. We accepted or start to communicating about the new Hungarian grant strategy, which is based on the idea of connectivity, but which is the opposite of decoupling, what you were mentioning. I would just describe 4 elements of it. One element is to preserve identity, because you have to have a strategy which is based on your identities, backed by the grassroots voters, because otherwise it's not going to work. The second element, modernization of the country. It has to be speed up, and it's happening in Hungary. The third one, defend sovereignty in an age of sovereignty. If you're losing sovereignty, then it's impossible for you to navigate in the changing world order based on your national interest. And the fourth element of it is a connectivity-based approach, where you try to engage with all players and try to create, probably also on a transactional basis, so win-win situations. I'm not sure about this. We never use this term in Hungary, but on a very similar basis to create win-win situation, and through this lift up the country socially, economically, and from a security point
a quick question, and you can refuse to answer.
Yes.
But is Hungary now going to play the role of a midwife to fix the European-American relationship?
So it's we are talking about elephants, and in the same time we are like a mouse. So we know our role, and we know our size, and we know our limits. But obviously we try to do our best, and we are already doing it.
So thank you so much, Balázs. Thank you so much, Velina. Thank you so much, Max. I think 4 words that stick with me as we close this particular segment: identity, sovereignty, modernity, connectivity. A new format for globalization that we heard from this morning. We will, of course, have enough time during the rest of the day to hear your views, for your pushback, for your perspectives. But please join me in applauding Balázs, Velina, and Max this morning for their wonderful intervention.